This is Edward Douglas from Shock Till You Drop and ComingSoon.net. I'm here with Kevin Greutert, who
Hi.
is the director of Saw 3D, and he's also was the director of Saw 6. And he's also been working on the Saw from the very first movie, I believe, right?
Started the Saw franchise on Saw 1 as editor.
Okay. Sorry, hang on a second. Time is. Sorry. Okay, so we'll start with that. I'll cut that. So anyway, so now you're with Saw 3D, and this is reportedly the last in the series. Now I'm curious, when did this start coming about? Because obviously I know doing a movie a year, you need to start planning at least the writing part well ahead of time. So at what point did they say, okay, we're going to do this movie in 3D, it's going to be the final movie in the series?
They began planning the film in July of last year. I'm not exactly sure when they started writing the script, but it was probably around Thanksgiving. After Saw 6 came out, there was a little bit of a rethink on how to do the whole thing, whether to do the whole thing. And one of the first choices they made was to shoot the film in 3D and to really exploit the look of 3D and the sort of fad of it all, but in a good way. Make it a movie for the ages, you know. So I think 3D is it's a format that's here to stay, and they just wanted to make sure that the final Saw was something that would look as up to date as possible.
And that definitely has a larger scope. From what I've seen in the trailer, definitely has a larger scope than we've seen before. I mean, you have a scene which looks like you shot in Dundas Square in Toronto with a whole crowd.
That's right.
Was that also very much from the beginning you wanted to plan that, or?
Yeah, I think. My understanding is that one of the first things that came up is that there needs to be a big public trap, and it needed to be in broad daylight with lots of spectators, and so that was kind of our marching orders. So you know, we definitely took that bull by the horns and made it as big and impressive a scene as we could.
Oh, cool. Now, obviously, you don't want to spoil things. There's a lot of spoilers about you don't want to spoil the plot. I know there's a general plot that there's basically a support group for people who've survived.
That's right.
Jigsaw's plans. That's the main plan. I mean, it seemed like there was definitely like two trilogies, and then this movie. And I assume this movie kind of encompasses all the trilogies. I mean, we see some people back again.
It does. You know, this movie it wraps up a lot of the storylines that the audience has been following for 6 movies. At the same time, though, we really wanted it to be kind of a standalone film. Mm-hmm. So I think more so than any of the Saw sequels, this movie can be viewed even if you haven't seen the other Saws or don't you know have your degree in Sawology. So it's really a combination of both. Something that will give the fans what they want and deserve, but also for general audience is a watchable, understandable, coherent project.
Oh, really? So this is going to be a standalone. People could walk in and not know really.
Yeah. Quite a few people have seen it that didn't know Saw, and when I queried them about it, did you get this? Could you follow that? They were good, and I was very impressed because that's something that we really wanted all along.
I get the impression this has a very different look and feel. I know obviously the 3D is going to add a lot to that, but it definitely seems like it's very deliberately away from the normal sound stages.
The scope of the production is a lot bigger than it was in the past Saw films, and there are scenes that are kind of clean and modern looking, but really the intent there was to show that the Jigsaw legacy is being brought out into our world, the normal world. But that said, a very large amount of the movie is in a very dark, grimy, horrible environment, like the other Saw. So it has elements that are both familiar and new.
Okay, and I mean, generally, I mean, I think the last few movies has gotten to the point where it's really all about the traps, and very much, I mean, there's an overall story, but it's always about the traps, and I mean, it was this kind of similar thing where you're usually in the meetings to figure out the traps when they're writing, or
absolutely the traps. Sometimes the traps don't really get conceptualized until the very last minute, which it's unfortunate, but I think that's just a product of the process, which is we really want the traps to be good. But that said, the story always comes first, and the story was very much set in place before we got down to the nitty-gritty details of the traps themselves. To me, people wouldn't come back to these films if it was just a bunch of traps with people getting slaughtered. It has to have a story component. It has to have a human element. We have to be watching some person's story for a Saw movie to work.
Now, how about Tobin? Because obviously he's been doing these from the very beginning. Is he still like excited about coming to work every day and playing this character, or is he kind of a...
Tobin loves being Jigsaw. There's no question about it. He attacks that part with a zeal like rarely seen in actors. He really loves developing it. As a person, Tobin is, of course, nothing like John Kramer, as far as I know. He can be a bit intimidating because he does have this terrific jigsaw presence about him, even when he's not trying. But at the same time, he's very much his own man, and the character is a creation.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if he actually played the character more than Robert Englund did Freddy Krueger, because it seems like it's probably even. It'll be even with this movie, or is there? Do you know?
Probably what?
Even as far as Robert Englund playing Freddy Krueger in movies, he did I think 7 or did he do 8?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not positive, but I think you're right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there was no thought of like trying to like at least being even with Robert
Well,
Englund.
we weren't really competing with with Nightmare, but that's a funny idea.
Oh yeah. I also understand you have a guy from Linkin Park in the movie as well. Like, acting
That's
with
right.
This first time?
Chester Bennington from Linkin Park is in the film. I think he's done some acting, and of course, in his music videos, you get an idea of the sort of intensity that he delivers. And he did not hold back in this film. He did a great job, and we made sure to exploit that intensity. He's not a file clerk in this movie.
Okay.
He did a great job, and my hat is off to him because he works it without a shirt at night in the Toronto winter outside. It was a very grueling shoot for him, but he was smiles the whole time. It was great.
And what about Carrie Elways? Because obviously he was there from the very beginning. He was there when they had like no money and were
That's right,
trapped in a basement with like one set, and that was it. And
it was fantastic bringing Carrie Elways back to the franchise. It's just become a bigger and bigger problem every year that we haven't shown what happened to Dr. Gordon, and I think one of the great pleasures of making this film was to finally show the fans what happened when the doc crawled out of that bathroom, and the question is now definitively answered.
And one of the things, obviously, they make a big deal about this being the final thing. If this movie comes out, it makes $35 million opening weekend. What's going to stop them? Are they at least going to take a year off? Because it's literally been 1 year, one movie for 7
That's
years.
right.
It must be tough.
Of course, the plan is for this to be the final Saw, and everybody feels like the story has been told, and that there really isn't a reason to go on. I do believe that this is going to be the last one, and you're right that it takes too long and it's too difficult to plan one of these films for them to just wait and see how it performs in the box office and expect to have another one for Halloween of 2011.
Right.
So, but things do get rebooted, and I don't see it happening, at least not in the next 5 years.
Well, it's funny because I talked to James Wan recently, and they never really saw it as a horror movie, and they probably never saw it as a franchise. They kind of saw it as like a crime thriller, kind of interesting crime thriller, kind of twist ending.
James never intended for there to be sequels.
Right.
But it's funny though, because the sequels came very naturally, and I think Darren brought a great energy to the franchise, and re-envisioned it as a series, and I think they both did a great job.
One of the cool things about this year's installment is actually coming out Halloween weekend, which is one of the things the first movie did. This one, and then they kind of moved it a week earlier.
That's right.
This was actually coming out Halloween, which should be interesting because Halloween's on a Sunday this year, which should be interesting to see if. Because usually horror movies kind of like do Big Business Friday. I'd be curious to see whether or not it.
I think it'll help us on our opening weekend that Halloween's on a Sunday. I think it's really fun to open on the actual weekend of Halloween. Because you're right, we got away from that.
And you have the weekend to yourself too. You don't have any other movies open.
That's right. Nice. There aren't any really major films competing with us on the opening weekend.
Which is great. Yeah.
Hopefully it'll work to our benefit.
Yeah. Now I have to ask you, one of the oddest things to come out of last year's face-off between Saw and Paranormal Activity is when your name was brought up to direct a sequel to Paranormal Activity, which is just like one of those strangest things you would ever imagine to happen. And then you came back and did this one. I don't know if you can comment on that or not, but I was really curious about that.
That's a pretty long story, but I think Paranormal Activity was a fantastic movie, and even though it probably took a lot of our glory away on the weekend that Saw 6 came out, I couldn't have had a better film to kick us out at the knees, as it were, because it was a film after my own heart. Very low budget, came from out of nowhere, very, very creative and well-made movie. when the Colonel people approached me about making the sequel, I was overjoyed. It was a real honor. As it turns out, Hollywood is a crazy place where insane things happen, and I wound up making Saw 3D instead. That's just life, I suppose.
Would it be as satisfying doing all that, like the home video cameras? Would it be as satisfying doing that to like?
It would have been very different. I mean, one of the great things about Paranormal Activity is that the characters were just incredibly realistic. I thought Mika and Katie just did such a great job in creating people that just seemed like one of us.
Right.
And that's so different than Saw, which is very condensed and over the top and energetic, in a cinema way, not in a real way. So to me, the experience of working with actors that were improvising and really putting a lot of focus on creating realism was a challenge that I really look forward to. I'll have to find it in another film.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because after doing some of these movies, I assume this is out of your system now. You'll never want to kill another person on screen ever again. Any involvement? Do you have any idea what kind of thing you want to do next? Or
well, most likely my next film will be a horror movie.
Oh, really?
But,
okay.
That said, I really do want to work in a lot of genres. I have a lot of interests. Before I got involved in Saw, I had mostly worked in made comedic shorts and done a lot of writing, always with a sort of dark comic or a science fiction edge to it. Okay. And I would love to get back to that.
So you were a fan of horror before. There wasn't just like you got hired for a job as the editor, and then it was like
no,
from there.
I love horror and always.
Oh, okay. And because one of the things I also liked is that you kept it very consistent to look the whole movies. Have you gone back to see it, watch any of those old movies while you were making these two last movies?
You mean the earlier Saws?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, before making Saw 6, I sat down and watched the previous 5.
Okay.
But frankly, I know those movies so well. I know every frame, not only of what's on screen, but of what was shot from all of the Saw movies. So it wasn't necessarily something I had to do. It was just something I wanted to do. Because I had so little time to prep Saw 7, I didn't go back and rewatch it.
Okay.
But someday I will again.
I mean, I have a feeling that in 3 years, I'll take a couple years off, and then we'll have a 10th anniversary box set, which will have all the stuff you left on the floor of the other movies, or something, or some of the interesting stuff. Yeah.
We have, even for Saw 3D, we've already prepared deleted scenes and alternate versions of scenes. Some things that maybe should have stayed in the movie. Some things that definitely I'm glad we took out of the movie, but they're still fun, and I think fans will really enjoy them.
Great. What's the general running time? Do you have a running time yet, or how many?
I don't know if we're supposed to talk about that. It's not.
Okay.
It's not a long film.
Okay.
I know a lot of the fans said, make it 2.5 hours, make it 3 hours, and there's a lot of talk about there was originally scripts for Saw 7 and 8 that got compressed together, and that's not exactly the idea for Saw 8 kind of was folded into Saw 7, but it's not like we took 250 pages of stuff and turned it into a 90-minute movie.
Okay.
Saw films have always been very compressed, possibly with the exception of Saw 5. The pacing is very important to me as an editor, and I just really wanted it to never be dull, as it were. And so if it's short, it's short. It doesn't mean there's not a lot of story there.
Right. Well, it would have been a huge bombshell. You said, oh, by the way, it's 3 hours long. That would be like the biggest bombshell of it. It's a 3D and it's 3 hours long, and you're not leaving the theater. We're going to lock you in there. And
very few films deserve to be 3 hours. In fact,
I agree.
Very few films deserve to be 2 hours.
Right. That sounds like an editor talking.
Well, I almost never see a film that needs to be longer.
Right, okay, yeah.
And when I just watched The Social Network, and that was a movie that went over 2 hours, and I didn't even notice.
Right.
Generally, when I'm watching a movie, I'll just be like, why didn't they cut that out? Or couldn't that be a little bit, tauter? And so with Saw, you do not find yourself nodding off.